Good afternoon. Thank you all for being here today. We come here today in the protective shelter of God's healing love to comfort one another in our common loss. We gather as people of the Spirit who are conscious of the beauty as well as the fragility of life here on earth. So we gather to hear words of hope. We gather to mourn the death, but mostly to honor and celebrate the life of Hank Quinnett. Now hear these words of comfort from our Christian tradition from Revelations. Blessed are those who die in the Spirit, for they now rest from their labors, and all of their good deeds will follow them. And we would please stand for the hymn if you're able.
For everything there is a season, and a time for every matter under heaven, a time to be born and a time to die, a time to plant and a time to pluck up what is planted, a time to kill and a time to heal, a time to break down and a time to build up, a time to weep and a time to laugh, a time to mourn and a time to dance.
The second reading is from the book of Romans, chapter 8, verses 38 and 39. For I am convinced that neither death nor life, nor angels, nor rulers, nor things present, nor things to come, nor powers, nor height, nor depth, nor anything else in all creation will be able to separate us from the love of God in Christ Jesus our Lord.
So first of all, on behalf of Southminster, sympathy to Hank's family. I know his passing will leave a great void, and that's true of many of his friends also. So it is true, this is a day we come to mourn, but more than that, a day to come and celebrate this wonderful, wonderful person that we were privileged to have in our lives for so long. So Henry Allen Hank Quinnett of Oak Grove, Oregon, was born in Seattle to Eugene and Marie Quinnett on July 29, 1935, passed away on October 18, 2023, at the age of 88. He was on hospice care for only a short time, having been diagnosed with leukemia just very shortly before. But he died peacefully at home with his family, having had time to say goodbye to them. And that's a blessing, to be able to have that time and to say your goodbyes and not have a very long time of illness. Hank is survived by his daughter and son-in-law, Maggie and Tom Songer, daughter and son-in-law, Jenny and Nathan Hampton, and granddaughters, Samantha Songer and Sarah Hampton. He was preceded in death by his parents, his brother and sister-in-law, William and Donna Quinnett, his brother Dean, and his beloved wife, Ruth. Hank and Ruth were married for a bit over 51 years. I think it's hard for many of us to even think about Hank without thinking about Ruth. They had one of those just long and loving and kind relationships. They weren't very sappy, but you could tell being around them that they just respected and cared deeply for each other. Hank was above all, I think, a man committed to family, and that's where he found great joy. He was a loving father to his and Ruth's two daughters, Maggie and Jenny, and they'll share more of their memories in a bit, but they told me how he'd make breakfast on weekends, teach them to ride their bikes, eventually teaching them how to drive a car, because he was the calm one in the family. And then he'd change their oil and rescue them when they needed rescuing from the side of the road. So they'll tell you more about those stories in a bit. My memories of Hank are this. He used to sit there, he and Ruth kind of right in there, and this very calm, kind, quiet, unassuming man, and he was just there when you needed him. I remember him helping with Ruth's dad, George, and her sister Doris, seemingly never impatient. I never saw him roll his eyes at some unusual request. He was just a devoted caregiver, and for Ruth as she struggled with chronic pain the last months of her life. So he spoke little, but he did have a very dry sense of humor, and every once in a while I'd get that little mischievous glint in his eye, and you could tell there was something he was seeing that was funny. He showed his love through action, and he left behind a lasting legacy of devotion to his family and service to his community and his country. He joined the Army National Guard before graduating from high school, and this decision eventually led him to 42 years with the National Guard in a variety of positions, and he retired as a sergeant first class. So for many years, he worked a day job as sort of a civilian, still working kind of with the National Guard is what I understand. I don't know how that worked, and then he also took weekends and 2 weeks a summer to be with the National Guard. In the electronics repair shop was where he worked most of the time for that time. In 1990, his unit was called to active duty during Operation Desert Storm, and he looked out for the younger folks there, was deputized as a postal carrier delivering those much-needed letters to the troops. His technical skills, dedication to excellence, and deep sense of responsibility and ability to remain calm in any situation earned him the respect of all who worked with him. Now, Hank was also a talented gardener. I think Ruth was the one who picked out the flowers, and he was the one who tended them. He was a fixer of almost anything that broke, and a putterer, especially puttering around with cars and fixing cars. Had a bit of a mild fixation on cars, and he would identify things, events in his life by what car he had at that time. So Hank didn't wear religion on his sleeve, but he lived it. The essence of kindness, service, generosity, and compassion. And that is the legacy he passes on to his loved ones. This memory will live on in the hearts of all of those who had the privilege to know and be with Hank. So after the song, we will have a time for sharing of memories, and his daughters will come up here and share. And then those of you who would like to, you can stay where you are. Just raise your hand, and we will bring a microphone around to you. And I would remind you when you do that, please hold the microphone up so that we can hear what those stories are that you would like to share. So let's stand for the song.
Reminder that this song will go first verse and second verse without a refrain, and then we'll go to the refrain after we sing the third verse and the fourth verse. So just keep that in mind, and we'll sing "I Will Come to You."
I've been thinking a lot about what to say. I think it's appropriate that we're here together to celebrate my dad on the observed Veterans Day this year. But he was so much more than that, than his service. He taught so much by example. The work ethic, being steadfast, loving through service, empathy. That's a big one. He was a really empathetic person. He always thought about how other people were feeling. I remember when I was little, I'd be taking a bath, and I had a mattress heater pad in the bed, and he would always, when I was little, turn on the heater so that at night when I was going to bed after a bath, that I would feel cozy. And it's just one of the million little things that he did. That's all I can think of for now. There's so many stories, so many.
I've also been thinking about what to say here, and I didn't write anything down. I'm just winging it. But so much of what Maggie said is reflected in my experience. But I was trying to think of times I had with him alone. And what came to mind for me was when Maggie and I were both younger, the family would go camping at Lake Merwin. And I was probably about, 11 or 12 when I decided that I wanted to go fishing with my dad. And so he got up with me, and he took me down like early in the morning on his vacation, and he rigged a little trolling motor on his big motorboat so that he could get it slow enough to fish on. And he taught me how to fish, and I caught some fish that were in the barely big enough to keep category, and then I made him cook them. And I did not even realize that maybe those weren't worth eating for years, because he treated it just, of course we're going to cook them. And it was sort of a treasured time with him for me, that time in the fishing boat. I also have another experience that Maggie doesn't have, because when probably about 6 months ago, my dad had a subdural hematoma, so bleeding between the brain and the skull. And he had to have surgeries, a couple of them. And at the time of the second one, the family as a whole decided that we had reached the end of his living alone period. And we had kind of had some prior conversations about what might happen then. And so within 3 days, myself and my husband and my daughter had all moved into his house from a standstill. I was sort of concerned about how this was going to go. Just in general, because if you were to take the person off the street and then basically take their entire household and their entire routine and throw it up in the air and see where it lands probably wouldn't go well. But that was not my dad. He had such grace about it. Some of that may be because he actually took care of our mom's dad, his father-in-law, and so he remembered some of that experience. But some of it was just Dad. He was just very calm and very sort of accepting, and generally what we did was fine. But we were also really conscious about the changes we were making. But I learned so much from living with him those last 6 months. It's different living with somebody as an adult. It's weird because I had even lived with him as an adult a couple of times. But living with him without my mom, without that sort of cushion, my mom was wonderful, and she took up a lot of space in the room. And my dad, being able to figure out that if nobody else was controlling the remote control, my dad would be watching old cowboy movies or occasionally science fiction. Finding out, Maggie actually got some of this too, where he started telling stories toward the end, and she was able to write some of them down. He told me that he was held back a grade in school, and I didn't know that until maybe a month before he passed. There was so much to him, and yet what he expressed, he often expressed without words. When I think about the gifts that he bought, not that my mother bought, but that he bought, they were generally things like car battery jump starters, which does not sound like a great gift, but I'll be honest, it has been useful. It has been so useful. And then you say, oh yes, because my dad loves me, he gets me this stuff. On the day he died, he was, based on what my sister said, I think he was sort of resisting going until my sister told him that we would take care of each other, because taking care of us was such a part of his life that we needed to release him from that. He was a great father. He was a great grandfather. From what I can tell, he was a great friend. We've started looking through papers, and we found some letters from his work, to and from his work buddies. We're still finding things. And we're still finding things because he kept everything. It's all very organized. It's all very organized, and he kept everything. So we're having to do a little bit of sorting. But I'm sure we will continue to learn as we keep going. I'm going to pass this off to you all now, and I'm enthusiastic to hear your stories too.
Yeah, so if you would hold your hand up if you want to share and say your name, please, so we know who you are. Thank you.
Okay, I'm Becca Hampton. I am the sister of Jenny's husband, Nathan. And they got married when I was about 19. Thankfully, they waited an entire week after my birthday to do it, and they didn't pick the year I turned 18. Well, I didn't want to be busy working as a florist on my birthday, details. But when the two families got together, they blended so completely into one unit. We did holidays, we did birthdays, we did all sorts of things together. And in a very short period of time after the first time we met, I was calling Hank and Ruth mom and dad, just like I called my parents mom and dad. And I've been doing that since I was at least 19. And I'm 43 now. And so for more than half my life, I had two moms and two dads. And Dad was always there with a hug and a bright smile and it's so great to see you. And for a kid who needed a little extra love and acceptance, that was really, really special to have two sets of parents that loved me that much.
Hey, I'm Dan Moores. I've met Hank in 1982, and when a new unit in the Guard started, and we became really good friends at that point. And so I worked with him. I was in the Guard with him. I went to Saudi with him. I think I spent more time than his own kids with him at times, and that. I could probably keep you guys entertained for hours on some of the crazy things we ended up doing. Like when they bought Lake Merwin, there was an old cover over the trailer they had. Well, Hank and I decided to tear it down. And so we calculated how this thing was going to fall. And that, so we did all these cuts and everything. We had ropes tied off to it, and it wiggled and wiggled and wiggled and fell completely the opposite way than it was supposed to. And then, like I said, we spent time in the Guard and that. So you go on these what you call bivouacs, and then you sleep in these little pup tents, and I ended up being in the same pup tent. And if people that know, Hank snores like you wouldn't believe. And anyway, here we are in the middle of the night, and I hear this terrible roar, and I go, what is it? He had his darn nose stuck in my ear, and just snoring to beat the band. And that, but anyway, I won't keep going. I'm gonna miss him a lot. He always stopped by the house whenever he could, and actually, I think I talked to him about 4 days before he was diagnosed, and so it really became a shock to me. Yeah, thanks a lot.
Hi, I'm Sophie, Elise's oldest daughter. You could tell everything by Grandpa Hank's expression, his smile, and you could tell that he always had a sparkle in his eye. You could always tell that he loved you and accepted you no matter what.
Hi, I'm Elise. I was Hank's niece. My mom and Ruth were sisters, so they were very close. So I spent a lot of my childhood with my cousins here, and with Ruth and Hank. I was trying to think of any specific stories. and there are a few here and there, but, you know, kind of thinking back, you know, he was just an ever-present, supportive rock, and he never asked for anything in return. So, and it's been said a lot that he was just a really caring person. At my mom's memorial, he joked about how my mom was the last owner of every car she owned. But what he didn't say was how many times he came over to change her oil, or either fix her car or bring it to a mechanic. How many times he went with her to buy a new car. You know, my mom many times over said, you know, she was in her early 20s when Ruth and Hank met, and she said, this, you know, he's just my brother, you know, so, you know, when my mom was struggling after my dad passed, and for many years after, he and my Aunt Ruth would come over to help clean her house. They would take us both out to lunch after church here, and for years. And it was just never a question if he would be here to provide support to family. During the holidays, he always made sure everyone had a water and Crystal Light with ice. You know, Aunt Ruth was definitely the organizer, but he was the doer. He you know, he made sure everyone had a plate of food, had a drink, you know, made sure things were cleaned up, and he didn't sit down until everyone else was seated. You know, my Uncle Hank was someone who, he didn't say much, as you know, many people have said, but he was really someone you knew you could count on. And he truly cared and showed us every day through his actions and service to others. So he will truly be missed.
Hi, I'm Lanny from Seattle, and Ruth Gwinnett was my sister, so I'm Hank's brother-in-law. At any rate, in Hank, what you got, there's a lot of one-stop places where you can get everything at one place, and usually it doesn't turn out to be true. But in Hank, you got a one-stop, decent person. We, my wife and I have, I have to think about this a minute, 11 kids. And the oldest is now 53, and the youngest is 13. And we kept, the oldest is from my first marriage, and the rest are from like hither and yon, let's say. And when we came to visit, I'm sure it seemed like it wasn't just visitation, it was waves of visitation over the years. And Hank was always the most patient and accepting guy, no matter how much notice he got that this was going to happen. It was an amazing thing. He was a very, very smart guy, and he was also interesting. He was smart, but didn't really flaunt it. Unlike a lot of smart people, he was also very, very practical. And at any rate, whenever we got to town with whatever age range of kids we happened to have at the time, he was the most patient and accommodating person. And I think you've heard the same thing from everybody that's talked so far about him. So we thank God for him.
My name's Mary Lou, and I've been part of this congregation for over 40 years. And of course, that means I knew Hank and I knew Ruth. And I do not have a specific story, but as I'm listening to all of you, I'm realizing what he did for this congregation. I've always thought of Hank as a pillar, really strong, but I'm realizing what he was an anchor. He was safe harbor. He brought that to his family. He brought that to this congregation. And I just wanted to stand up and say, thank you, Hank. You gave us a really nice gift.
Well, hi, everybody. I'm Tom Songer, and I don't want to say was, I am Hank's son-in-law and husband to his daughter, Maggie. And when I first met Dad, I have to admit I was very confused. I had never really spent time around people like that before. And in a lot of ways, I still feel like that. As you might know, different people come from families of different varieties of chaotic experience. And I kept waiting for the moment when Dad would suddenly show his evil side. And I really never stopped waiting for that. But of course, as everyone here knows, that was never going to happen. And more than that, what he showed instead was a kind of gentleness and kindness unlike anything I've ever seen, even to this day. And I think he probably would have been accepting of anything I would have ever decided to say or do. I could have said at any point, okay, I'm going to go drink blood now for the rest of the night. And he would have said, okay. But speaking of his practical gifts, one of the best gifts I've ever received was from him. He gave me a drill, an electric drill. And I can't tell you how much I needed that and didn't realize I needed that. He was, in fact, an amazing gardener, too. I saw that for years, but one funny story to illustrate that, one time when Maggie and I were cleaning out a cupboard in one of the kitchens we used to have, we found, I think it was an old sweet potato that had turned into a little plant in the back there. And I just couldn't bring myself to throw it away. And so we were, for some reason, going over to Maggie's parents' house that day, and we brought it along. Maggie said, bring it over and see if Dad wants to grow it. And we left it there, and I forgot about it. And it must have been a year later. I came back, and I saw that he had been taking care of it all that time. And it had turned into this beautiful, lush plant, unlike anything that you'd imagine would come out of a potato. Absolutely amazing. And his sense of humor sticks with me too. I remember being in this room on many occasions with him here. And I still keep expecting to kind of hear his voice, but because he had a very distinctive voice. But one time when we were here together, I was commenting to him how nice he looked, because most of the time he liked to wear casual clothes. He was a big fan of brown t-shirts. And I told him how nice he looked, and he's wearing his tie and coat, and he said, yeah, don't get used to it. Does that sound familiar? he never did drop his sense of humor. When he was coming back from one of his more recent hospital visits, they had given him a CAT scan, and I was listening on the speakerphone to Maggie talk to him at home, and I heard him say, "Yeah, they gave me a CAT scan. No cats." Does that sound like the kind of humor you remember? Yeah. So I don't have much experience, talking at these kind of events. The only other time was at my own dad's memorial service, but it's an honor to do this and to say that I really loved him. I will miss him like crazy for the rest of my life. And I see him in both Maggie and Jenny. I don't know if they know it, but they carry so much of him. And that's one of the things that I will be grateful for the rest of my life. Yeah. Thank you.
My name is Judy, and I just wanted to say, look, I've been also a member of this church for over 40 years. And when you're in this church for this long, all kinds of people come through. And I think back to George and Peg, the great-grandparents were the first ones I knew from the family. I was George's deacon after he had lost Peg. And then through that, I got to know all of the kids. And then I went to family camp one year, and I got to meet all of the Hamptons who'd married into the family. And it's just, as I look around, these memorials, they're reunions. They're just reunions of people that you don't get to see all the time. And I do know, I have reflections about the Sundays when Hank and Ruth would come to church. It's like, oh, Hank and Ruth are here, yay! It was a big day because it didn't happen all that often toward the end when Ruth was not feeling her best. But I always thought of him as just this incredible human being who wore kindness around way before we had the signs around that says choose kindness. He was kindness personified. And to all of you here who I know and who know me, mwah.
Hi, I'm Nathan, the other son-in-law. It was interesting to hear Tom say, you'd never experienced anything like that before, and in some ways I actually kind of knew what to expect because my grandmother was in a lot of ways like that. She was the quiet one that was just always there. Hank was, he was very accepting. I won't share the story, the first story that's coming to mind. But he was that person who was always there. That you talked about the sweet potato. I don't know how many house plants Jenny and I were given over the years. We always, after a month or two, they were always drooping. We thought they were dead. We'd take them over and give them to her parents. And, sure enough, he had a way of resurrecting dead houseplants. But he, that was kind of what he was. You hand him the dead house plant and he'll take care of it. I don't know how many, they mentioned going out and rescuing Maggie and Jenny from the side of the road. I don't know how many times he came out because we'd borrow his truck occasionally. I don't know how many times I locked myself out of that truck. I have never locked myself out of any car except that one. Well, no, I did the Buick once. But he came out, he finally, after what must have been the dozenth time, he finally handed me a second set of keys. Because, you know, if I had two, then one of them would always be in my pocket. Yeah, I wasn't worried when we moved in with him this last time, because that was, you know, I mean, as Jenny said, we'd lived with him before, and he always found a way to get along, whatever happened. He was just, he'd roll with the punches, as it were. I'm going to miss him a lot. It was actually, particularly in April and May, his snoring was really a comfort in a lot of ways, because in the house there's an open fan going from the living room, in the wall, going from the living room to the master bedroom. And so we'd go out in the living room and we could hear him snoring, and so we knew he was still okay. And I think both of us, at least a couple of times, went out there into the living room just to listen for that, just to make sure. And this was very sudden that this happened. We were expecting him to be around for a little longer, and I'm going to miss him.
Thank you all for those beautiful stories. And you can certainly share more stories at the reception following. And now we're going to see some pictures of scenes from Hank's life. You got to see a lot of his favorite cars. So maybe you can imagine Hank driving one of those cars off into the sunset, as they say, meeting up with Ruth. A farewell blessing for Hank. For Hank, beloved father, grandfather, father-in-law, friend, cherishing memories that are forever sacred, sustained by a love that is stronger than death, we commend our beloved Hank to God and to those who have gone before him. Help us, O compassionate Spirit, to be reconciled as he starts away. We release him from our midst. We release him into that next place of peace and joy, and we say to him, go in peace. Let nothing on earth hinder you. We are grateful for your life. We will always cherish your spirit and your memory. So go now with our blessings and our love to travel with you. Amen. And if you would please stand for the final hymn. You're all invited to a reception that the deacons have provided here in the gallery, so please go and enjoy and share some more stories. And now may the peace of Christ, which passes all understanding, be with you and bring you comfort and hope. Go in peace. Amen.